When you look closely at the ultra-wealthy, the individuals who control global conglomerates, supply chains that cross continents, and companies that influence entire markets, you notice that they perceive risk in a way that is completely different from the average person. While small investors and entrepreneurs often focus exclusively on immediate profit, the ultra-rich understand that every supplier is a vital gear in a much larger mechanism, and that the failure of even one gear can compromise the survival of the entire machine. That is why they treat their suppliers not as operational costs, but as strategic partners. They examine not only delivery capacity, but also resilience, reputation, financial health, and even corporate culture. To them, a supplier is not just someone who provides raw materials or services. It is a lifeline of trust, a hidden connection between the heartbeat of the business and its long-term survival. Imagine you run a global tech firm dependent on microchips manufactured in a politically unstable region. If that supply line breaks, billions in market value could evaporate in days. That is why the ultra-rich build contingency strategies long before risks materialize, establishing multiple suppliers across different geographies and cultivating long-term partnerships that dramatically reduce the vulnerability that could topple their empires. But the secret isn't simply diversify suppliers, as most business books claim. The real strategy of the ultra-rich lies in creating invisible layers of protection that act like a silent insurance policy hidden within contracts, exclusivity clauses, periodic audits, and even in the way they treat their suppliers. Instead of blindly depending on the goodwill of their providers, they engineer mechanisms that force transparency, enforce consistency, and ensure quality. Think of a global food company. It is not enough to simply purchase tons of wheat or corn. It's about knowing where it comes from, how it is produced, whether the crops are protected from climate extremes, and whether the supplier has the financial liquidity to survive economic downturns. The ultra-rich map these risks from seed to shelf, creating ecosystems of protection with alternate routes for every critical link. This is not paranoia, it's discipline. It is the difference between companies that endure global crises and those that vanish in silence. And here lies a powerful lesson. While most people wait for problems to appear before they react, the ultra-rich build solutions long before the risk even exists. They know risk is never a matter of if, but always a matter of when. And perhaps that is precisely what separates those who merely participate in the market from those who actually shape it. The ultra-rich see risk not as a danger, but as an opportunity in disguise. When a supplier falters, they don't just see a temporary setback. They see the chance to renegotiate terms, to vertically integrate production, to acquire a strategic company, or to innovate with entirely new alternatives. In fact, many of the largest conglomerates in history were born from supply chain crises. What for most businesses would be the end of the line, for them was the beginning of empire building. This mindset transforms weakness into strength because it forces the investor to play chess, not checkers. Every move is deliberate, every risk is assessed, and every apparent loss is a potential gateway to greater gains if navigated with strategy. If you are starting to realize how this perspective could transform the way you manage your own risks, you are already beginning to think like an elite investor. And that is why I want you to be part of this journey with me here at Investor School. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment. Hit that button and join the thousands already learning to think, decide, and invest like the greats. Now pause and reflect. How are you handling the risks in your own financial life right now? Do you rely on a single paycheck, a single source of income, a single supplier for your business? If the answer is yes, then you are placing yourself in a position of fragility the ultra-rich would never accept. They know true financial freedom is born from resilience, from the ability to keep growing even when something breaks. And here is the most fascinating part. You don't need to be a billionaire to adopt this mindset. You can start today by mapping your own suppliers, partners, and income streams. Ask yourself, if this link breaks, what is my plan B? The moment you do that, you are already stepping into the mindset that builds fortunes. Because in the end, the difference is not in the size of your bank account, but in how you see and manage risk. That perspective is the key that unlocks the doors to real wealth. Think of this final section as the operating manual the ultra-wealthy rarely read aloud, but always follow. It starts with a simple, brutal truth. Resilience is a competitive edge you can build deliberately. Where most people treat supplier disruption as an unlucky event, elite investors treat it as an engine for advantage. The playbook begins with rigorous, repeatable diagnosis. Map every single input, not just the top 5 suppliers, but the second and third tier providers whose failure cascades upstream. Give each node a score for likelihood, impact, detectability, and recoverability. Layer that map with geography, political risk, climate exposure, and financial health. Then convert scores into action buckets. Monitor, mitigate, ensure, or capture. Monitoring means real-time signals, inventory levels, shipping ETA anomalies, delayed payments, social media mentions, local news, and even satellite or weather feeds in critical cases. Mitigation means contracts that give you levers, clear SLAs, penalty structures, escrow or milestone payments, visibility rights, and operational buffers like safety stock, safety contracts, and pre-approved alternate vendors. Insurance is often overlooked. Trade credit insurance, supply chain interruption policies, and hedges can be cheap compared to a single week of lost revenue. Capture is the strategic move. If a supplier repeatedly threatens your continuity, consider buying them, investing to stabilize them, or partnering exclusively, turning a threat into control. That's how crises quietly become acquisitions, and how vulnerability morphs into vertical advantage. Now for the pragmatic sequence you can act on tomorrow. First, run a 72-hour stress test on your top 3 dependencies. What would happen to revenue, reputation, and cash flow if each failed for 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months? Second, build a supplier scorecard and make it a board-level metric. Availability, quality incidents, financial health, ESG flags, geopolitical exposure, and flexibility to scale. Third, create contractual tripwires. Clauses that trigger progressive remedies, expedited audits, temporary price holds, emergency sourcing funds, or preemptive buyout options. Fourth, design operational redundancies that are economically sensible. Dual sourcing for critical SKUs, nearshoring some capacity for speed, or modularizing products so a single component failure doesn't shutter the whole offering. Fifth, institutionalize wargaming. Quarterly scenarios run by cross-functional teams, procurement, legal, treasury, operations, comms, to rehearse responses. The ultra-rich don't wait for chaos. They rehearse their calm. These moves don't require billion-dollar balance sheets. They require discipline and a mindset that prioritizes survivability over short-term margin heroics. If you want a single simple diagnostic to separate casual managers from strategic leaders, here it is. How many realistic, tested contingency plans do you and your closest partners have that would keep your core business running at 70% capacity if a primary supplier vanished overnight? If the answer is none or an idea, you're exposing yourself to avoidable catastrophe. Start small, protect the top 20% of your revenue drivers, because that 20% often accounts for 80% of the pain. Couple that with a financial sieve, insist on supplier financial transparency for critical partners, quarterly P&L snapshots, debt schedules, major customer concentrations. Use this information to create a ladder of interventions: early support, short-term loans, flexible payment terms, operational fixes, third-party logistics, temporary production swaps, and ownership options, minority stake or earn-out agreements. Complement these with reputational management. Public-facing contingency plans reduce market panic and preserve customer trust. Finally, integrate ESG and governance into your supplier decisions. Today's reputational risks are tomorrow's regulatory fines, and the ultra-rich avoid both by demanding ethical, transparent supply ecosystems. We finish where every practical lesson must land, with a choice. You can let supply-side risk be an accident someone else designs for you, or you can take a designer's approach and build a system that anticipates and converts that risk into leverage. Start by mapping, score by score, then move to legally enforceable clarity, operational redundancy, and financial backstops. Rehearse your responses until panic becomes procedure. And remember, real wealth is less about the size of your assets and more about the architecture that protects and multiplies them. If this framework sparked an idea you can use in your current projects, drop a comment with your single biggest supplier worry. I'll share tactical replies to the best ones, and we'll turn the most urgent problems into case studies. If you're following the investor school journey, hit subscribe and join the conversation. The smartest plays come from people who act, test, and iterate together. Fortunes aren't found by chance, they're engineered by design.